We continue in the closing chapters of 2 Samuel 21 to 24, jumping over these Psalms in chapter 22 and the beginning of chapter 23 to the second of the list of David's warriors, as you can see on the right side of the screen in the blue section there, matching the one in the last video from chapter 21, where we saw a list of 4 Philistine giants who were killed by 4 people from the people of David. And now we hear a more expanded list of 30. And I went over in the last video some of the questions about how these are linked and how they fit with the theology that we saw before, so I won't go over that again now. We'll just jump right into our immediate seeing. And just to note, what one of the elements that connects the two, as we can see here in the blue, is the Hebrew nakim, to strike down 6 times in the first list and 5 times in the second, as you can see here with war again and struck down in the previous one, and we can see here throughout the warriors, the Gibborim, and the struck down, struck down, struck down. And with barely any exception, what's being celebrated here is simply killing. Although the stories contain several curious elements: lentils in Levi, water in Bethlehem, and a handsome Egyptian. Why we need to know those things, I don't know, but I guess we'll find out as we go. Some of these people are going to be familiar from what we've seen before, and some of them, who knows who they are, but let's just jump through that and at least explore the elements that we have some knowledge about, and we'll do that starting now. So these are the names of the warriors whom David had. And we know right away they're divided into 2 groups, a group called the 3 and a larger group called the 30. And we know nothing about what authority that gave them or honors. It certainly seems like at the end of a war or the end of a reign that people are giving medals and various honors, and yet we don't know what these honors exactly meant. And they're a little bit inconsistent, as we'll see. So we start off with just the generic names of the warriors, the Gibborim, that we can see here. And as my note below has, and this note is from Clement, the social changes have given rise to a new upper class in the community, which includes, along with the members of the royal family and the influential officialdoms of the emerging central state, also figures in the professional soldiery. If in the center praise is given to Yahweh, who has given David the victory and honored David with his dynasty, then in the lists clear recognition is given to the names of those without whom the victories would not have been achieved. And yet, what Clement is noting there is perhaps consistent, that here we see that David is saved by individuals, and yet, as he's noting in the psalm, it'll all be attributed to Yahweh. Is Yahweh working through these various warriors, or is that just something the text is claiming? And we have to decide that ourselves, depending upon whether we think Yahweh is on the side of the monarchy in these wars or not. But as I was noting in chapter 21, this section is framed, at least at the beginning, by rejecting the violence of killing the 7 grandchildren of Saul as a means to assuage Yahweh's anger that caused the famine, but rather the nonviolent witness of Rizpah is what changed David and changed Yahweh. So that always hangs over all this celebration of male killing here. So the first one we know nothing about, Josheb, Pas-Hebeth, a Tachmonite, whatever any of that means. And he was chief, literally head. And we see chief a number of times, and that's Hebrew Rosh, head. And that's one of a couple of titles. We'll see Abishai is also listed as a commander, a sar, which we've also seen a number of times. So the 3 is introduced here like as if we know it. But we don't know anything about that. And we can only have to assume that the next 3 listed next to him, or literally afterward, in both cases, Ahari, list the first 3 who are the 3, but it doesn't say that exactly. Let's pay attention. So what he's celebrated for is killing 800 at one time. We don't even know who they are. Are they Philistines? Were they at war? Or is he just killing people? It's not clear at all. It's not specified. It's simply killing. It doesn't say he saved the nation of Israel or that he saved David. It's just the celebration of killing. Next to him, or literally and afterward, among the 3 warriors, was Eleazar, son of Dodo, son of Ahohi. Why we need 3 generations, we don't know. But Dodo as a name is only here in verse 24, although apparently not the same one. He was with David when they defied the Philistines, who were gathered there for battle, but were gathered where and defied when, and nothing is given about these circumstances. The Israelites withdrew, but he stood his ground. So a little bit of a scene is painted where the Israelites are scared, and only this one warrior, Eleazar, stands there and struck down the Philistines until his arm grew weary. His arm growing weary, literally his hand, arm and hand here. Norsi has arm here and hand there, but they're both yod, hand. But arm grew weary would certainly echo Moses holding up his staff to hold off the Egyptians, but that's not the same situation here. And the grew weary echoes what we might have seen about David growing weary in chapter 21:15, as my note has. has, but it's a different word. There the word was for David growing faint. And it certainly is a suggestion, even though the Hebrew doesn't have the same weary that the New RSV has, to suggest that there's tiredness happening, that they're tired of war. But his hand clung to the sword, and Yahweh brought about a great victory that day. So here the text is claiming that Yahweh is doing this, but we have to put that in the context of the larger theology. Then the people came back to him, but only to strip the dead. Kind of a nasty statement about the people. They allowed him to risk his life, and they come just to get the goodies. The phrase stripping the dead, here, hard to pronounce out the vowels, is 10 times in Samuel, but we can see it especially in 1 Samuel 31, 8-9, worth going back to. The last implicit reference to Saul and Jonathan, when the Philistines came to strip the dead, they found Saul and his 3 sons fallen on Mount Gilboa, and they stripped the bodies of Saul and his sons there. So even though the last of Saul's sons and grandsons that were to be killed were killed in the last chapter, Mephibosheth still living and eating at the king's table, this certainly echoes that. Next to him, and seemingly the third of the 3, but not named that way, is Shammah, son of Agi, the Hararite. And his son is also among the 30, which you can see here in 23:3. If I go back a verse, you can see it. Jonathan, son of Shammah the Hararite. So we know nothing more about him but 2 generations of the son of Agi, his son and grandson. But we know nothing about who these people are or what Hararites are. And then we have this first of our strange little details. The Philistines gathered together at Lehi, and as Falkman notes, can be read as an allusion to Judges 15, where Samson took his stand. So it could be a second Samson fighting against the same enemy, but we don't need to get in those details because Samson's scene does not involve a plot of ground full of lentils. Helkah here, only here and in the next verse, but recalling chapter 14, the field of lentils that Absalom had burned to get Joab's attention. But the lentils, that's not lentils, that's just the plot of ground. That's just this term here, chelkah. But the lentils might remind us of the lentils that Jacob used to fool his brother Esau and get the birthright from him back in Genesis 25. And the army fled from the Philistines, did not give up the lentils, but again Shammah took a stand in the middle of the plot defending the lentils and killed the Philistines, again seemingly single-handedly like the previous scene. So twice we see that the Israelites ran away and only a single champion protected them, in this case protected the lentils. Then we get toward the beginning of harvest. It's not told which harvest, but the word here certainly recalls Rizpah's witness from harvest until the fall rains, and contrasts with that. Whereas hers was a nonviolent witness over the dead bodies, here's a witness with not killing in this immediate scene, but a longing for water from Bethlehem from the king, certainly echoing many of the elements of back in 1 Samuel when David is hiding from Saul before David is the king. And this certainly seems like a time before David is the king because the Philistines are at Bethlehem, and there's no sense that if David is the king at Jerusalem, the Philistines could have a garrison in his hometown. But again, no specific situation is named. Let's go back to the details and see some of those echoes. So toward the beginning of harvest, 3 of the 30 chiefs, and now we find out that there's these 30 are heads, all rosh hair, all heads, went down to join David. So 3 of the 30 is the same 3, we don't know. That 3 was called the 3, and this is just simply 3. So we don't know if that's the 3. Went down to join David in the cave of Adullam, recalling 1 Samuel 22 and the final reminder of his time escaping Saul, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. And as I was noting last time, Rephaim can also be plural, meaning giants, and we saw it as giants, as children of the giants, in the first list in chapter 21. So why the New RSV translates it this way? Probably because it's translated that way back in Joshua as a place. But in either case, it's a valley of giants. And yet it's described, that situation connects with chapter 21. But this again seems to go back to the time before David is king. David is in the stronghold, the Metsudath, that we saw again back in 1 Samuel 22, and also in chapter 24. But the garrison of the Philistines, Matzavah, was then at Bethlehem. And then we have this interesting scene here that I'll roll down and you can see the whole thing. The only element here that's really not about killing. David said longingly in the Hitpatel form here, and it's only here in Samuel, 7 times in Proverbs, one of those late words that we'll look at more detail in chapter 22 next time. Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate. Is he actually asking that, or is he just dreaming of the freedom of being back in his hometown? But in any case, three of the warriors take it literally. And I'd like to suggest that this echoes the attempt of Abishai to go in to the cave where Saul was and execute him. And David says, don't do that. He's the Lord's anointed. And we'll see a similar element here. So the three warriors broke through the camp of the Philistines, drew water from the well of Bethlehem by the gate, and brought it to David. Otherwise, unnoticed with no battle. It is seemingly how they did that, we're not told. But he would not drink of it. He poured it out to Yahweh, and he said, Yahweh forbid. And that echoes precisely what we see back here at 1 Samuel 26:11. Yahweh forbid I should raise my head against the Lord's anointed. Take the spear at his head and the water jar, and let us go. So it also involves taking water, but he doesn't drink it there, and he doesn't drink it here. But it certainly suggests that we be reminded of that scene. As Falkman notes, the act of drinking would make him fully responsible for a life-endangering wish. So he feels, and with a cursing word, Halilah, he forcibly flings away the fatal alternative as far as he can, much like he flung away the temptation to kill or attack the Lord's anointed, knowing he would be one of those eventually, as he is now at the end of the story. And he adds, can I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? And that's a curious metaphorical statement, because there's no sense that the water of Jerusalem is bloody, and his men did not shed any blood, either the Philistines or themselves, in getting the water. But that's what he says, and he would not drink it. And the three warriors did these things. What those extra things are, we don't know. He poured out the water. And now it shifts again with nothing more to be said from that. And we get Abishai again, matching chiastically Abishai in 21:17. So we see him here, noted as the brother of Joab. And I noted it last time, but I can bring it up again, how Abishai will be the only one standing after David gives Solomon orders on his deathbed to make sure that Joab's gray hairs do not go down to Sheol in peace. And we find out that Abishai, interestingly, is chief of the 30, won a name beside the three, was the most renowned of 30, became their commander, but did not attain to the three. Who knows what the politics of that are? Is it because David doesn't want to associate these sons of Zeruiah, who he's twice said are too violent for me, with being celebrated? But then why is he chief of the 30? Why wouldn't Joab be chief of the 30? Joab seemed to be the chief of staff of the entire army. We know nothing about these politics. Then we hear with his spear he fought against 300 men and killed them. And like with the 800 earlier, we know nothing about, is this at war? Are these Philistines who are these 300? Did he kill them all by himself? 300 men, really? And won a name. Only David is described this way. And notice what's at issue: the reputation being gained by being killing machines. Much as we heard in 1 Samuel, the cry out in the streets, Saul has killed his thousands and David his tens of thousands. These killing machines don't rise to that level, only hundreds. And yet that's what's being celebrated, simply being killing machines. He was the most renowned of the 30 and became their commander, their Sar. And we last saw Sars around the issue of Absalom, but did not attain to the three. Then we see Benaiah, who we saw twice before, but he's going to be especially important in 1 Kings. He's going to be the one who will kill Adonijah and assure that Solomon is the only one left to be king. So as the Saulites were killed to make sure that David is on the throne, Benaiah will make sure that he kills Solomon's own brother Adonijah to assure the reign for Solomon. And he's described as a valiant warrior. There's a translation issue because manuscripts differ, and yet the New RSV goes along as most do, not with the Masoretic text, with the Sarai text, which has it this way: a valiant warrior. From Kevzeel, a place in southern Judah, according to Joshua 15, and generically a doer of great deeds, whatever that means. Nothing specific is said. Is that meant to be something other than killing? We don't know. And then he's described as doing three curious things. He struck down 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. Whoever Ariel of Moab is and why those 2 sons are to be struck down, again, we have no idea. He went down and killed a lion in a pit on a day when snow had fallen. And what a curious thing that is. As Falkman suggests, when wild animals hungrily searching for food risk deeper penetration into the human world than usual, perhaps that's the reason. Perhaps it's also because on a snowy day, the lion would be harder to hear and would sneak up on you, showing more bravery. But as far as I can tell, this is the only real snow in the entire Bible. Snow is used metaphorically for white as snow, or for the power of God odd that snow comes down. But as far as I can find, maybe there's another one that I haven't seen, is the only example. There's not a lot of snow in Israel. And then the final thing he does, he killed an Egyptian. Fair enough. Why do we need to know he's a handsome man in Ishmara, like David, as we saw earlier? But why? And why an Egyptian? What does the Egyptian have to do with anything that's going on here? When was this? Why are they killing Egyptians? We simply don't know. The Egyptian has a spear in his hand, but Benaiah went against him with a staff, the staff against the spear, snatched the spear out of the Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. Looks like something out of an action movie, but there it is. And such were the things that Benaiah, son of Jehoiada, did, and won a name beside the 3. So he's not one of the 3, but won a name, and he was renowned among the 30, much as we just heard that Abishai was. But like Abishai, did not attain to the 3. But David put him in charge of his bodyguard, his Mishmaath. Only in the Psalm do we hear that again, and also in Isaiah. And then we hear this long list. And I'm only going to hesitate on the list where there's names that we know anything further about, and there's not much. So among the 30 was Asahel. He'll be killed in... he was already killed, but he's listed there. Notice past tense there. And you could just follow my notes down here. We see another Ittai. Ittai the Gittite back at chapter 15 and 18. Is that the same Ittai? Maybe not. A Gittite would not be a Benjaminite, so that's another Ittai. We hear of Azmaveth of Baharim, and we saw Baharim there's an Absalom place, but we know nothing more there. We saw Makkah earlier in the story, and we see that interesting lineage here, though. We see Eliam, son of Ahithophel of Gileonite, and we realize that Eliam is Bathsheba's father, and Ahithophel is Bathsheba's grandfather, and we saw how he was one of David's counselors, but ordered his things and committed noble suicide when his counsel was rejected. So these are families of Bathsheba, hidden in the story here, but also some of his warriors among his 30. Then we see this strange thing, Zelach the Ammonite. And shocking to find an Ammonite among David's elite warriors, because if we go back to Deuteronomy 23:3, we see no Ammonite or a Moabite should be admitted to the assembly of Yahweh. And according to Genesis, the Ammonites and Moabites were the descendants of Lot's drunken incest with his daughters. This story probably doesn't know anything about that, but it still has no favor for Ammonites, so that's a shocking thing too. We see Nahari of Beroth, which you saw Beroth earlier in chapter 4 and a couple times in Joshua, but otherwise not significant. But then finally this, it ends with Uriah the Hittite, reserved until last, as my note below has, where it will be noticed. Following David's song of self-praise in chapter 22, it reminds readers of the whole incident in case they've been taken in by the royal propaganda. And the very next verse expresses Yahweh's rekindled anger, not necessarily connected with Uriah the Hittite, but maybe we should hear it that way. And then it ends curiously saying 37 in all, but my count, and you can count them for yourself, was 30. And that's an interesting question given that the next chapter, 24, is all about the evils of counting. But we won't go to that next. We'll go back to the Psalms before we go to that. So see you next time to explore the Psalm of David in chapter 22 of 2 Samuel. See you for that. Bye-bye.